My mother forged my 14-year-old son's signature on inheritance documents, $420,000 from his grandfather's estate. She spent it all on a European vacation and told him, "Your grandfather didn't leave you anything." I didn't confront her. I smiled at dinner and handed my son a sealed envelope. I said, "The lawyer just confirmed that the signature was." My mother's hand went to her water glass. She didn't pick it up, just touched it. My sister stopped cutting her chicken. My father looked at my mother, then at me, then down at his plate. My son opened the envelope. He read the first line. He looked up at his grandmother. He said, "This says someone forged my name." My mother set her fork down very carefully. She said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I said, "Yes, you do. Let me tell you how we got here. How a woman who raised me, who taught me to tie my shoes and read chapter books, became someone who would steal from her own grandson. How I sat across from her at Sunday dinners for 3 years, knowing exactly what she'd done, and said nothing. How I built something she couldn't see coming because she'd spent my entire life teaching me that I was never going to amount to anything worth noticing. I grew up in a house where my sister was the smart one, and I was the one who tried hard. My mother said it like it was a fact, the way you'd say the sky is blue. Your sister has always been naturally gifted. You have to work for everything. She said it in front of teachers. She said it in front of my friends. She said it at my high school graduation when I finished with a 3.9. Well, you certainly put in the effort. My sister went to Cornell. I went to state school. My mother told people her daughter was at an Ivy and her other daughter was studying business. Like business was something you did when you couldn't do anything else. When I graduated and got my first job in insurance sales, my mother asked if I'd considered going back to school for something more substantial. I was 22. I was making $41,000 a year. I thought that was substantial. My sister married a cardiologist when she was 26. My mother planned the wedding for 18 months. She invited 230 people. She had the reception at a country club. When I got engaged at 28 to a high school teacher, my mother said, "Well, he seems very nice." That was it, very nice. We got married at a restaurant with 60 people. My mother wore beige, but here's what my mother didn't know. I was good at sales, really good. Not in the way that makes you popular at the office, in the way that makes you money. By the time I was 30, I was pulling in 6 figures. By 32, I'd moved into commercial insurance, corporate clients, big policies. By 35, I was making more than my brother-in-law, the cardiologist. My mother had no idea. She kept giving me advice. "Have you thought about real estate? Everyone says real estate is where the money is." I had just closed a contract worth $180,000 in commission. I said, "I'll think about it, Mom." When my son was born, my mother bought him a onesie that said "Future Doctor" and gave it to my sister to give to me. My sister handed it over with an apologetic shrug. I dressed him in it once, took a photo, sent it to my mother. Then I put it in a box in the garage. That same week, I opened a college fund for him, started it with $10,000. My mother said I should be saving for a house. I already owned 2 rental properties. I said, "You're probably right." The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you space to move. Nobody watches you closely when they think you're not doing anything interesting. My mother asked me about work the way you ask someone about a hobby. "How's the insurance going?" Like I was selling plasma or doing Uber on weekends. I'd say, "It's going well," and she'd nod and turn to my sister and ask about her job running the nonprofit. The nonprofit that paid her $60,000 a year. I was making 4 times that. My mother had no idea. My father died when my son was 12. It was sudden. Heart attack in the driveway. He was 71. We buried him on a Thursday. The will reading was the following Tuesday. My mother, my sister, me, my brother-in-law, and the attorney. My father left everything to my mother except for 2 provisions, $50,000 to my sister, and $420,000 in a trust for my son, his only grandson. The trust was clear. The money went to my son at 18. Until then, it was managed by a trustee, me. My mother received the house, which was paid off and worth around $600,000, plus his retirement accounts, which totaled just over $1 million. My sister got her $50,000 outright. My son got his trust. I got named as trustee, which meant I controlled it, but it wasn't mine. It was his. My mother said, "Why does he get so much?" The attorney said, "Because your husband specified it in his will." My mother looked at me. She said, "Did you know about this?" I said, "No." That was true. I had no idea my father had set aside that much for my son. I knew he loved him. I didn't know he'd loved him in a way that came with $420,000. My sister said, "That's a lot of money for a 12-year-old." The attorney said, "He won't receive it until he's 18. Until then, his mother manages it as trustee." My mother said, "Well, I'm sure she'll be responsible with it." The way she said responsible made it sound like a question. I didn't react. I thanked the attorney. I signed the paperwork. I went home and opened the trust account. I put the money in a mix of index funds and bonds, the way my financial advisor recommended. I sent my mother a copy of the allocation statement because the will required annual updates to beneficiaries. She didn't respond. 3 months later, my son came home from my mother's house and said, "Grandma says Grandpa didn't leave me anything." I was unloading the dishwasher. I stopped. I said, "What?" He said, "Grandma told me that Grandpa's money went to her and Aunt Lisa. She said he didn't leave me anything because I was too young to understand money." I put the plate down. I said, "Grandpa left you $420,000. You'll get it when you're 18. My son stared at me. He said, "Grandma said he didn't leave me anything." I said, "Grandma is wrong." He said, "Why would she say that?" I didn't have an answer that didn't make my mother sound like a liar, so I said, "Maybe she forgot." But I knew she didn't forget. You don't forget $420,000. I called my mother that night. I said, "Why did you tell him he didn't get anything?" She said, "I didn't want him thinking about money at his age. He's too young to process that kind of thing." I said, "He's not too young to know the truth." She said, "You always did have your own way of doing things." I let it go. I thought maybe she was grieving. Maybe she resented that my father had given my son so much. Maybe it felt like a comment on her, like my father was providing for my son because he thought I couldn't. I didn't know. I let it go. That was a mistake. If you have ever been counted out by someone who should have known better, you know exactly what that silence feels like. You know what it's like to sit at a table with people who think you're small, while you're carrying something they can't imagine. You smile, you nod, you let them think whatever they want, because correcting them won't change anything. They've already decided who you are. 6 months after my father died, my mother went to Europe. She was gone for 5 weeks. France, Italy, Switzerland, Greece. She stayed in 5-star hotels. She sent postcards. She came back with photos of herself in front of the Eiffel Tower, the Colosseum, the Parthenon. She posted them on social media with captions like "Living my best life and never too late to see the world." My sister commented on every single one. "So happy for you, Mom." I didn't comment. I thought about the math. 5 weeks in Europe, 5-star hotels, first-class flights. That trip cost at least $60,000, maybe more. I didn't say anything. My mother had over $1 million from my father's estate. She could spend it however she wanted. But then the annual trust report came. I got it from the investment firm in January, like always. I opened it. The balance should have been around $445,000 with interest and growth. The balance was zero. I called the firm. I said, "There's been a mistake." The representative said, "Let me pull up the account." I heard typing. Then silence. Then she said, "I'm showing a withdrawal of the full balance on June 18th of last year." I said, "I didn't authorize a withdrawal." She said, "I'm showing a signed authorization form. Do you want me to send you a copy?" I said, "Yes." The form came through 10 minutes later. It was a withdrawal request for $420,000, signed by my son, dated June 15th. The signature looked exactly like his handwriting, almost exactly. But my son was 14. He didn't have access to that account. He didn't even know the account existed in detail. And he definitely didn't authorize a withdrawal of $420,000. I called my attorney. Her name is Patricia Reyes. I've worked with her for 8 years on business contracts and real estate deals. I told her what happened. She said, "Do you have the original trust documents?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Bring them in. Bring the withdrawal form. Bring anything you have with your son's real signature on it." I brought everything: school forms, birthday cards he'd signed, a permission slip from the previous month. Patricia laid them out on her desk next to the withdrawal form. She said, "This isn't his signature." I said, "I know," she said. "It's close, but it's not his. Look at the way the tail on the Y curves. Your son writes it straight. This one loops. And the spacing between the first and last name is different." I said, "Can you prove it?" She said, "I can hire a forensic document examiner. It'll cost around $3,000, but yes, I can prove it." I said, "Do it." She said, "Do you know who withdrew the money?" I said, "I have an idea." I went home. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my sister. I sat in my kitchen and I pulled up my mother's social media. I looked at the dates on her Europe photos. She left for Europe on June 20th. The money was withdrawn on June 18th. 2 days before she left, I called my bank. I asked about the trust account withdrawal. They confirmed the money had been wired to an account under my mother's name. They sent me the transfer receipt, my mother's name, her account number, $420,000, transferred in full. I hired the forensic document examiner. His name was Martin Cross. He had testified in fraud cases for 23 years. He took the withdrawal form and my son's real signatures. He analyzed them for 2 weeks. His report was 11 pages long. The conclusion was on page 1. The signature on the withdrawal authorization form, dated June 15th, was not executed by the individual whose name appears on the document. The signature shows evidence of simulation and tracing inconsistent with natural handwriting patterns. In other words, someone forged my son's signature. I asked Martin if he could testify. Said, absolutely. I asked Patricia what my options were. She said, you can file a police report. This is fraud, forgery, theft, or you can sue civilly and force repayment, or both. I said, if I file a police report, what happens? She said, the DA decides whether to prosecute. If they do, your mother could be arrested. If convicted, she's looking at prison time. Fraud over $100,000 is a felony in this state. I sat with that for a long time. Prison time, my mother. The woman who taught me to read, who made me pancakes on Saturday mornings, who called me every Sunday for 39 years. The woman who stole $420,000 from her grandson. Patricia said, what do you want to do? I said, I need to think about it. I went home. I didn't tell my husband yet. I didn't tell my son. I sat in my office and I looked at the forensic report and I thought about my mother in Europe. 5-star hotels, first-class flights. The Eiffel Tower, the Colosseum, $420,000 that wasn't hers. I thought about my son, 14 years old. His grandfather had left him that money, not for a vacation, not for my mother's retirement adventure, for his future. College, a house, a start, and she'd taken it. She'd forged his name and taken it. I started building my case, not for court, not yet. For the moment when I would sit across from my mother and show her exactly what she'd done. I wanted documentation. I wanted witnesses. I wanted her to see it all laid out in a way she couldn't deny. I pulled the bank transfer records. I pulled the investment firm's correspondence showing the withdrawal. I had Martin Cross's report. I had Patricia's legal analysis. I had the timeline, withdrawal on June 18th, Europe trip starting June 20th. I had my mother's social media posts showing the hotels, the restaurants, the first-class lounges. I built a folder. I labeled it. I put copies of everything inside, then I waited. I didn't confront my mother at Sunday dinner. I didn't call her and scream. I showed up. I smiled. I asked about her trip. She showed me more photos. She told me about a restaurant in Florence where she'd had the most incredible pasta. She said, you should go someday if you can afford it. I said, maybe I will. My sister was there. She said, Mom, you have to send me the name of that hotel in Santorini. It looked amazing. My mother said, oh, it was worth every penny. I watched her. I thought about my son, about the trust account that should have had $445,000 and instead had zero. I thought about my father who had worked for 40 years to leave his grandson something solid. I thought about my mother sitting in a 5-star hotel in Greece spending money that wasn't hers. I smiled. I ate my dinner. I went home. My husband finally asked me what was wrong. I told him everything. He stared at me. He said, she stole from our son. I said, yes. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to make sure she gives it back. He said, how? I said, I'm working on it. Patricia called me 2 weeks later. She said, I've drafted a demand letter. It lays out the evidence. It requests full repayment within 30 days. If she doesn't comply, we file a civil suit and a police report simultaneously. I said, send it. She said, are you sure? Once I send this, there's no taking it back. Your mother will know you know. I said, send it. The letter went out on a Thursday, certified mail. My mother would have to sign for it. I waited. She called me on Saturday. She said, I need to talk to you. I said, okay. She said, can you come over? I said, I'll be there in an hour. I drove to her house. The house my father had paid off. The house worth $600,000 that she'd inherited free and clear. I parked in the driveway where my father had died. I walked up the steps. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She looked smaller than I remembered. She said, come in. We sat in the living room. She didn't offer coffee. She said, I got a letter from your attorney. I said, I know. She said, it says I forged your son's signature. I said, you did. She said, I did not. I said, the forensic examiner says you did. The bank records show the money went into your account 2 days before you left for Europe. Your social media posts show exactly where you spent it. My mother's hands were shaking. She said, "Your father left me that money." I said, "He left you over $1 million. He left my son $420,000. You took my son's money." She said, "I needed it." I said, "For what, a vacation?" She said, "I deserved that trip. I spent 50 years taking care of your father. I deserved to see the world." I said, "With your own money, not my son's." She said, "He's 14, he doesn't need it yet." I said, "That's not your decision." She said, "I'm his grandmother." I said, "And I'm his mother, and you stole from him." She started crying, real tears. She said, "I didn't think you'd find out." I said, "That doesn't make it better." She said, "What do you want from me?" I said, "I want the money back, all of it, with interest. You have 30 days. She said, "I don't have it anymore." I said, "Then sell something, the house, your car." "I don't care. You took $420,000 that wasn't yours. You're giving it back." She said, "And if I don't," I said, "then I file a police report, and you'll be arrested for fraud and forgery, and you'll go to prison." My mother stopped crying. She said, "You wouldn't do that to your own mother." I stood up. I said, "Try me." I walked out. I got in my car. I drove home. My hands didn't start shaking until I pulled into my garage. Patricia filed the civil suit 3 weeks later. My mother didn't repay the money. She hired an attorney. Her attorney called Patricia and said my mother was willing to settle for half. Patricia said no, full repayment or we proceed. My mother's attorney said, "Your client is being unreasonable." Patricia said, "Your client committed fraud." The case was set for trial. But before the trial, there was discovery. My mother's attorney had to turn over financial records, bank statements, credit card statements, investment accounts. That's when we found out my mother didn't just spend the money on Europe. She'd spent it on my sister. My sister's nonprofit had been failing. Revenue down, donations down. My sister was about to lose her job. My mother had given her $150,000 to keep it afloat. The rest went to the Europe trip and a new car. A Mercedes. $68,000. I called my sister. I said, "Did you know Mom stole from my son?" My sister said, "She didn't steal." "She borrowed." I said, "She forged his signature." My sister said, "She was going to pay it back." I said, "With what?" My sister didn't answer. I said, "Did you know where the money came from?" My sister said, "She said it was from her inheritance." I said, "She lied." My sister said, "I needed that money. The nonprofit was going under." I said, "So you took stolen money to save your job?" My sister said, "I didn't know it was stolen." I said, "You didn't ask." My sister hung up. The trial date got closer. My mother's attorney kept pushing for settlement. Patricia kept saying no. My mother showed up at my house one night. She stood on my porch and said, "Please don't do this." I said, "You did this." She said, "I made a mistake." I said, "You made a choice." She said, "I'm your mother." I said, "And he's my son." She left. "If you are still with me, stay, because what I did next is the reason I am telling you this story." I decided I wasn't going to wait for trial. I was going to tell my son everything, and I was going to do it in front of my entire family. I planned a dinner. I told my mother it was for my son's 15th birthday. I told her I wanted the whole family there. My mother, my sister, my brother-in-law, my husband, my son. I reserved a private room at the same restaurant where my father used to take us for special occasions. The restaurant he loved. My mother said, "I don't think that's a good idea right now." I said, "I think it's a perfect idea." She came, so did my sister. They sat across from me and my son. My husband sat next to me. My brother-in-law looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. I waited until after we ordered. Then I handed my son the envelope. I said, "The lawyer just confirmed that the signature was forged." My son opened it. He read the first page of Martin Cross's report. He looked up at my mother. He said, "This says someone forged my name." My mother's hand went to her water glass. I said, "Your grandmother forged your signature on a withdrawal form. She took $420,000 that your grandfather left you. She spent it on a trip to Europe and on your aunt's failing nonprofit and on a new car." The table went silent. My sister said, "You're doing this here?" I said, "Yes." My mother said, "This is inappropriate." I said, "What's inappropriate is stealing from your grandson." My son looked at my mother. He said, "You told me Grandpa didn't leave me anything." My mother didn't answer. My son said, "You lied." My mother said, "I was going to pay it back." I said, "When? You've had a year, you spent it all, you don't have it anymore." My brother-in-law said, "Maybe we should talk about this privately." I said, "We've been private for a year, now we're being public." My sister said, "You're humiliating her." I said, "She humiliated herself." My mother stood up. She said, "I don't have to listen to this." I said, "Sit down." She sat. I said, "You have two choices. You repay every dollar you stole with interest within 60 days, or I press charges and you go to prison for fraud. Those are your options. My mother said, I don't have that kind of money. I said, sell the house, sell the car, liquidate your retirement accounts. I don't care how you get it, but you're going to get it. My sister said, that's her home. I said, and that was my son's future. My mother started crying. My sister put her arm around her. My brother-in-law stared at his plate. My son said, Grandma, why did you do it? My mother looked at him. She said, I don't know. That was the truth. She didn't know. She saw the money and she wanted it and she took it. Because she'd spent her whole life being the center of everything, and my father's death had moved her off that center and she couldn't stand it. So she took what wasn't hers and she spent it on making herself feel important again. I stood up. I said, you have 60 days. I walked out. My husband and my son followed me. We got in the car. My son said, is Grandma going to jail? I said, only if she doesn't pay you back. He said, do you think she will? I said, I think she's going to try very hard. 3 weeks later, my mother put her house on the market. It sold in 11 days for $615,000. After closing costs and paying off a small home equity line she'd taken out for the Merceds, she had $568,000. She transferred $453,000 to my son's trust account. The original $420,000 plus interest and penalties. She kept the rest. She bought a condo, 2 bedrooms, 1,200 square feet. She drives a used Toyota now. My sister doesn't speak to me anymore. My mother sends my son a birthday card every year. She doesn't come to dinner. My son's trust account is back where it should be. He'll get it when he turns 18. He knows exactly what it's worth and exactly what it cost. And I know exactly what I'm worth. I always have. It just took my mother 40 years and $420,000 to figure it out. But she knows now. They were arrested, not literally, but in every way that mattered. Their assumptions, their dismissals, their certainty that I would never be more than the daughter who tried hard. All of it stopped cold the moment I handed my son that envelope and said the one thing my mother never expected me to say. I knew exactly what you did, and I have been waiting for the perfect moment to make you answer for it. I thought I was done. I thought watching my mother write that check and move into a 1,200 square foot condo was the end of it. I thought my son knowing the truth and having his money back was enough. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. My phone rang while I was in a meeting with a client. I didn't recognize the number. I let it go to voicemail. When the meeting ended, I checked the message. It was from a woman named Jennifer Hartley. She said she was an estate attorney in Pennsylvania. She said she needed to speak with me about my father's estate. She said it was urgent. I called her back from my car. She answered on the first ring. Thank you for calling back so quickly. I'm handling the probate for your father's brother, Robert. I said my father didn't have a brother. She paused. Your father was James Mitchell, correct? Born in Philadelphia in 1951? Yes. Then he had a brother, Robert Mitchell, born in 1947. He passed away 6 weeks ago. I pulled over. I sat in a parking lot outside a strip mall and stared at the dashboard. My father had a brother. My entire life, my father never mentioned a brother. Not once. Not at holidays. Not at weddings. Not when he was dying in the hospital after his heart attack. Jennifer said, "Are you still there?" "Yes, I'm here. Robert never married, no children. His will names your father as his sole beneficiary. Since your father is deceased, the inheritance passes to his estate, which means it would be distributed according to your father's will. You're one of the beneficiaries, correct?" My mother is the primary beneficiary. My sister got $50,000. My son got $420,000 in a trust. Then you'll need to notify your mother. Robert's estate is valued at approximately $1.7 million. I sat with that number, $1.7 million, from an uncle I didn't know existed. I called Patricia. I told her everything. She said, "Did your mother ever mention your father having a brother?" "No, never." "Did your sister?" "No." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Your mother received all of your father's estate records during probate. If she knew about Robert, she would have seen correspondence. Bank statements, tax returns." "Something, what are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to find out if your mother knew about Robert Mitchell." I drove to my mother's condo. She answered the door in yoga pants and a sweatshirt. She looked older than she had at the restaurant dinner. Smaller. She said, "What are you doing here?" "Did Dad have a brother?" Her face changed. Not shock, recognition, she knew. "Come inside." We sat in her small living room. The furniture was from the old house. The couch where my father used to watch football. The coffee table where we'd played board games. Everything looked too big for the space. My mother said, yes, he had a brother, Robert. Why didn't I know about him? Your father didn't talk about him. Why not? They had a falling out before you were born. Robert did something, your father never told me what. He just said they weren't speaking and that was final. Robert died 6 weeks ago. My mother looked down at her hands. I know. You know. The attorney called me. She told me about the inheritance. When? 3 weeks ago. I counted to 5 in my head. 3 weeks ago, and you didn't tell me. I was going to. When? I don't know, I needed time to think. About what? She didn't answer. I said, the inheritance goes through Dad's estate, which means it gets distributed according to his will, which means you get most of it. My sister gets a portion. My son gets a portion. That's what the attorney said. How much is your portion? Around 1.2 million. I did the math in my head. 1.7 million total. My mother would get about 70% based on the estate distribution formula. My sister's 50,000 would become proportionally more. My son's 420,000 would increase significantly. I said, so you're getting over $1 million and you waited 3 weeks to tell anyone. I needed time. For what? She looked at me. Her eyes were different than they'd been at the restaurant. Not defiant, not angry, just tired. She said, I was trying to figure out if there was a way to keep all of it. The room got very still. I said, say that again? I was looking into whether Robert's will could be challenged, whether there was a way to argue that the inheritance shouldn't pass through your father's estate, that it should come directly to me as next of kin. You were trying to cut out my son again. I wasn't trying to cut him out, I just wanted to understand my options. Your options to steal from him, again? It's not stealing if it's legal. I stood up. You haven't learned anything. I paid him back. You paid him back because I forced you. You sold your house because I gave you no choice. And now, 3 weeks after you find out about another inheritance, you're already planning how to take his share. She stood up too. Her voice got louder. Do you know what it's like to go from a 4-bedroom house to this? To drive a 12-year-old Toyota? To have your daughter treat you like a criminal? You are a criminal, you forged a signature, you committed fraud. I made a mistake. No, you made a choice, and you were about to make the same choice again. She sat back down. She put her face in her hands. I don't know how to live like this. Like what? Like someone who doesn't matter. I looked at her. At the woman who'd raised me. Who taught me to read and tie my shoes and make pancakes on Saturday mornings. The woman who'd also spent 40 years telling me I wasn't good enough, that my sister was smarter, that my career was small, that my choices were disappointing. I said, you matter, you just don't matter more than everyone else. I left. I called Patricia from the car. I told her what my mother had said. Patricia said, do you want me to file a motion to ensure the distribution goes through properly? Yes. And I want to make sure my mother can't challenge Robert's will or my father's estate distribution. I'll draft something today. 2 days later, my mother's attorney called Patricia. He said my mother wanted to waive any challenge to the estate distribution. She would accept her portion without contest. In exchange, she wanted the matter handled quietly. No family drama, no public filings. Patricia asked me what I wanted to do. I said, tell him we'll handle it quietly if she signs an affidavit stating she attempted to explore options to reduce my son's inheritance and agrees never to contest any future inheritance matters involving him. My mother signed it. The estate was distributed 4 months later. My mother received $1.2 million. My sister received $95,000 based on her proportional share. My son received $712,000 added to his trust. With the original $420,000 that had been repaid, plus interest and growth, his trust account now held $1.1 million. I didn't tell my mother about the affidavit provision that also required her to attend family counseling with me for 6 months if she wanted to maintain any relationship with my son. She signed it anyway. Her attorney probably told her she didn't have a choice. The first counseling session was in June. We sat in a small office with beige walls and tissue boxes on every surface. The therapist's name was Dr. Caroline Webb. She asked my mother why she thought we were there. My mother said, because my daughter doesn't trust me. Dr. Webb said, why doesn't she trust you? My mother looked at me, then at Dr. Webb. Because I took money that wasn't mine. Tell me about that. My mother told her, all of it, the forged signature, the Europe trip, the money to my sister, the new car. Dr. Webb listened without interrupting. When my mother finished, Dr. Webb asked, what were you thinking when you did that? My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I was thinking that my husband had just died and I'd spent 50 years taking care of him and our family and I deserved something for myself. I was thinking that a 14-year-old didn't need $400,000. I was thinking that nobody would find out. Dr. Webb turned to me. What do you want from your mother? I said I want her to understand what she did. Not just that it was wrong, but why it was wrong. I want her to understand that my son is a person, not a concept, not a number on a bank statement, a person who she lied to, a person whose grandfather wanted him to have that money and she took it. Dr. Webb asked, do you want a relationship with your mother? I thought about it, really thought about it. I don't know, maybe, but not the relationship we had before. That one was built on her believing I was less than my sister, less smart, less successful, less valuable. I'm not interested in going back to that. My mother made a sound, not quite a sob, something smaller. She said, I never thought you were less valuable. I looked at her. Yes, you did. I didn't. You told me at my high school graduation that I'd really put in the effort, like being smart wasn't something I could be. Just something I could work toward and never quite reach. I was trying to compliment you. You were trying to make yourself feel better about the fact that your daughter who worked hard was competing with your daughter who had natural gifts. You needed me to be the one who tried, so my sister could be the one who succeeded. My mother's hands were shaking. That's not fair. It's exactly fair. You've been comparing us our entire lives. And when I started succeeding in ways you didn't expect, you couldn't handle it. So you pretended it wasn't happening. You asked me about work like it was a hobby. You gave me advice about careers I'd already surpassed. You acted like I was still the daughter who needed guidance when I was making more money than anyone else in the family. Dr. Webb leaned forward. How did that make you feel? I said. Like I was invisible. Like nothing I did mattered because she'd already decided who I was and nothing was going to change her mind. My mother was crying now, real tears, quiet ones. She said, I didn't know you felt that way. You didn't ask. We sat in silence. Dr. Webb let it stretch. Finally, my mother said, I'm sorry. I said, for what specifically? She looked up. For taking the money, for lying to your son, for making you feel invisible, for comparing you to your sister, for all of it. Dr. Webb asked, what do you want to happen now? My mother wiped her eyes. I want my daughter back. I want to know my grandson. I want to fix this, I said. It's going to take more than 6 months of counseling. She nodded, I know. We went to counseling every week for 6 months, then every other week for another 6 months. My mother started doing things she'd never done before. She asked about my work, really asked. Not in the way you ask someone about a hobby, in the way you ask someone about something that matters. She asked what deals I was working on, what contracts I'd closed, what challenges I was facing. She listened to the answers. In September, she asked if she could take my son to lunch, just the two of them. I asked him if he wanted to go. He thought about it for a while. Then he said, will you be mad if I say yes? I said, no, it's your choice. They went to lunch. They were gone for 2 hours. When he came home, I asked him how it went. He said, she apologized, like a real apology. She said she was wrong and she was sorry and she understood if I didn't want to see her anymore, but she hoped I'd give her a chance. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. And I'm thinking about it. He started having lunch with her once a month, then twice a month. She never missed one. She showed up on time. She paid attention. She asked about school and friends and what he was reading. She didn't bring up the money. She didn't make excuses. She just showed up. My sister and I don't speak. She sent me an email after the estate was distributed. She said I'd destroyed our family. She said our mother was humiliated and diminished and that I'd done it on purpose. She said the nonprofit had closed because without the money our mother had given her, they couldn't make payroll. She said I'd cost people their jobs. She said she'd never forgive me. I read the email twice, then I deleted it. I didn't respond. I saw her once, 6 months later, at a grocery store. She was in the produce section. I was getting coffee. She saw me. I saw her see me. She turned and walked the other way. I finished getting my coffee and left. My mother asked me once if I thought my sister and I would ever reconcile. I said, I don't know, maybe, but she'd have to acknowledge what happened. Not just that I was mean to Mom, but that Mom stole from my son and she took stolen money to save her job and neither of them thought that was a problem until I made it one. My mother said, she's struggling. I said, I know, but that's not my responsibility. The counseling ended in December. Dr. Webb asked if we wanted to continue. My mother looked at me. I said, I think we're okay for now. Dr. Webb said, you've both done good work here, real work. That doesn't mean everything is fixed, but it means you have tools now, ways to communicate that you didn't have before. My mother and I have dinner once a month now. Sometimes my son comes, sometimes it's just us. We don't talk about my sister, we don't talk about the money. We talk about normal things, books, movies, work, my son's school. Her condo, small things that don't carry weight. She came to my son's 16th birthday party. She brought a card with a gift certificate to a bookstore, not a check, not money, a gift certificate. She wrote in the card, "I'm proud of the person you're becoming." My son read it and put it on his desk. It's still there. My son's trust account is worth $1.3 million now. He knows exactly what's in it. I show him the statements every quarter. He asks questions. He understands compound interest. He understands investment allocation. He understands what his grandfather wanted for him and what his grandmother almost took. He asked me once if I thought his grandmother would ever do something like that again. I said, "I don't think so, but I'm watching." And so is the law. She signed documents that make it very hard for her to ever contest anything involving your money again. He said, "Good. I'm still in commercial insurance." I closed $2 million in contracts last quarter. I don't talk about it much. Not because I'm hiding it, because it's just my job now. It's not a secret or a weapon or a point of pride. It's just what I do. My husband asked me once if I regretted how I handled everything, if I thought I should have done it differently. I said, "I regret that it had to happen at all. I regret that my mother put me in a position where I had to choose between protecting my son and protecting her dignity. But no, I don't regret what I did. She stole from him. I made her give it back. That's not cruelty. That's consequence." He said, "Do you think she understands that?" I said, "I think she's starting to." My son will get his trust when he turns 18, $1.3 million. Maybe more by then. He'll have choices: college, travel, a house, starting a business, whatever he wants. His grandfather gave him that. I protected it. My mother tried to take it and failed. She knows now that I'm not the daughter who just tries hard. I'm the daughter who succeeds, and when someone threatens my son, I'm the mother who fights back. She learned that lesson at $420,000, then again at $1.2 million. I don't think she'll need a third reminder. My son asked me last month if his grandmother was coming to his graduation in 2 years. I said, "Do you want her there?" He said, "Yeah, I think so." I said, "Then she'll be there." Some people in my family still think I went too far. My sister hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. My brother-in-law avoids me at the few family events we both attend. My mother's friends from her old neighborhood stopped inviting me to their parties. But my son has $1.3 million that's actually his. My mother writes him cards that don't include checks or money or guilt. And I sleep at night knowing that when it mattered, I didn't back down. So, did I go too far or not far enough? Tell me in the comments.